How do you know if your base training is working? In this video, I'm going to share with you a test that I like to use to help make sure that my base training is on track. Warm-up is kept really easy. Pace gradually gets a bit faster. The heart rate, not so much. So that test is the MAF test. It's a test that I was first became aware of reading The Law of Running by Timothy Noakes. It was Mark Allen's training where he took the Phil Maffetone method, took the test from it where you calculate your max aerobic heart rate or maximal aerobic function. Now Maffetone uses a simple formula. It's 180 minus your age. So in my case, I'm 42 years old, so 180 minus 42, that gives me a heart rate of 138. Now, the aim of the test is to maintain exactly that heart rate. You go out and run a time trial at that set heart rate, and you take the pace from it, and that is your result. I like to use 8 kilometers. It's long enough to ensure that I can assess if there's any drop off on pace. I like to do it at an athletics track, which means I can do it at a few different locations. I pick lane 3 because at most tracks, the first 2 lanes are gated closed. So I do 20 laps, and because lane 3 is 415 meters instead of 400 meters, it gives me a total of 8.3 kilometers. I use the MAF heart rate as an approximation of my lactate threshold number 1, or that first lactate threshold. And what do we mean by this threshold? Let's have a look. Intensity versus blood lactate. And there's 2 key thresholds. Threshold 1, threshold 2. So the first is where you get that first significant rise in blood lactate. You see a deviation from a very straight line. That first threshold is an indicator of when the lactate is no longer staying in the muscle cells and it is leaking into the bloodstream. This is not to be confused with the second lactate threshold, often termed the anaerobic threshold. This is when the body is no longer able to keep a close to steady state or keep the lactate that's now in the bloodstream under control. I use the MAF heart rate as a reasonable approximation. There's a lot of assumptions there, but for me it seems to work out. That seems to be very close to what is often that first lactate threshold for me. Now, you don't have to use the MAF heart rate, but think of it this way. It's that point where you first notice a slight increase in your breathing when you're exercising. When breathing just starts to become noticeably a little bit harder, it's a good point to check your heart rate there. So it can be anywhere from 72% all the way up to maybe 84% of your maximum heart rate. In my case, the MAF heart rate works out to be 78% of my maximum heart rate. It doesn't have to be exact, but it has to be repeatable. You have to be able to reduce and keep the variables the same. So same heart rate, roughly in that same area, then we can measure what happens to the pace. So let's have a look at how I set this up. Let's set up the workout for my Garmin Forerunner for the MAF test. We do that through Garmin Connect. You can do it on the website or just as easy through the app on your phone. So let's get into Garmin Connect. So it loads up. So what we want to do is get into the workout. So bottom right, hit more. Find the training in the list. Get in there. Up the top you'll have workouts. So it takes you through and there's a list of all the other workouts that I have already set there. And here, create workout. It's a run. For the MAF test, I won't include the warm-up or cool-down. I'll record them separately. So all I want is just the workout itself. And because it's 20 laps around the athletics track, all it needs to do is record 20 laps for me. So I'm going to start off with add repeat, and that pops up down the bottom down there. Now the stuff that was already sitting there in Garmin Connect I want to get rid of. So on the right, hit the cross button. Do I want to delete? Yes. Delete that run? Yes. Delete the cooldown? Yes. Now for the repeats, it's not a run then recover, so I'm going to get rid of the recovery section. Again, delete. And that leaves me with the run. So it'll be 20 laps, so I want to repeat it 20 times. Now let's work out how we're going to do each lap. So we click on that, it goes in. Step type, it's a run. You can add notes if you want. Duration type. Now the options you get are time, distance, lap button, till you reach some calories, or heart rate. This one will be when I hit the lap button, because it will be at the athletics track. So every time I complete a lap, I'll hit the lap button. So I'm back. The next part is I want to set my heart rate. And for the MAF test, my MAF heart rate is 138. So I want to set the intensity target to that. So let's click on there. Target type. Can be a pace zone, speed, cadence, heart rate zones. Now that first heart rate zone are for your predefined heart rate zones, which are already in there. This one, I want it much tighter than those zones are. So I'm going to select custom heart rate zone. So that goes back. Then you set target. So on the left, you've got your low value. Let's scroll that up to. So I'll be looking, I want to hit a heart rate of 138. But I'll drop that down one. Below my target, 137. So as soon as it gets below 137, we'll sound an alarm. And for the high side, let's scroll that up. 138, and same again, but above, 139. So I've got a zone of only 3 beats. I'll allow for a little bit of natural variation, but alert me as soon as I get 2 beats away, and done. So we go back there. 20 laps. Each lap ends when I hit the lap button, and I have the heart rate zones that will alert me as soon as I get 2 beats away from my target heart rate. So, and my target heart rate, 138. So we click save. You can name it. MAF Test 138 beats per minute. Save. Now, to get it to the watch, pretty simple. MAF Test. Hit this little icon with the arrow pointing to a picture of a mobile. Next time we sync. So if we go back to my day, I was going to force sync it, but it looked like it was already going. To force a sync, just tap on up here on the top right, the circle arrows, and that will sync it. And we'll see just to the left of that, it's sending the data out to the watch itself. And done. I'm not quite sure how the previous MAF test went. I think the last one was about 44 minutes. So, and this one was 41 minutes something. So I think there's quite an improvement. But I've got to get this shift of work out of the way first before I can go through the data. So let's have a look at the results. So this is a 16-week window of my training, 6 minutes per K. And that's coming off maybe about 4 or 5 weeks of rehab from an Achilles injury, some 20 to 40K a week, and all low intensity. Then we moved on and we kept extending out the distance per week, kept the intensity still low, and as a result, quite a jump in improvement. It's good to see. But then what we see is 2 tests of quite a few weeks apart where I get a slight reduction in the pace. In these ones, I introduce more intensity above this heart rate. So I introduced a tempo run at or above around the MAF heart rate. So I listed it as 75 to 87% heart rate as my tempo runs. That seemed to create a slight drop in pace at the MAF heart rate. Next one round, I'd had introduced some 4 minutes at about 90% of max heart rate, and as a result we saw another slight reduction. But what happens afterward is I didn't introduce any more intensity, but instead continued out the low intensity. The long runs got longer, the easy runs got longer, and overall I accumulated a lot more kilometers per week. What we will then see is I've got quite an improvement in the MAF heart rate. And if we take it a straight line out of those full 16 weeks, I've averaged out a 3.8 second improvement per week in the speed that I run at an approximation of my first lactate threshold. What it shows is you can introduce some intensity, but if you're really looking at developing a good strong base, just be careful with how much intensity. Keeping some faster running in, because I get some adaptations that just sticking with low intensity effort will not ever cover, but a little bit goes a long way, and too much can erode some of that base.